As we all know, humans are capable of accomplishing the seemingly impossible to survive. The human survival instinct pushes us to survive and possibly thrive in hostile environments. People will always find a way to defeat nature and come out on top, whether it's the unrelenting ice, the vast desert, abandoned islands, or even outer space. We will share with you in this list the most amazing top 10 survival stories that will blow you away. Now, let's get into it. Number 10. Apollo 13. On April 11, 1970, NASA launched the Apollo 13 mission to send 3 astronauts to the moon. These 3 astronauts had no idea that their story would become one of the most famous in spaceflight history. This 3-human crewed mission to land on the moon was led by James A. Lovell, John L. Swigert, and Fred W. Hayes. However, unfortunately, Oxygen Tank 2 exploded 56 hours into the journey. The standard supply of oxygen, power, light, and water got disrupted. The astronauts were compelled to enter the lunar module as a lifeboat for 2 people for 48 hours. The lifeboat lacked enough carbon dioxide scrubbing chemical canisters to maintain the air breathable the entire journey back to Earth. To use canisters designed for the command module, they had to fabricate a crude adapter out of spare parts on board. The crew were on 1/5 of water rations and afterward had to deal with cabin temperatures that were almost close to freezing. Apollo 13 circled the moon on April 14th. On April 17th, a last-minute navigational adjustment was performed utilizing Earth as a reference point. The spacecraft re-entered Earth's atmosphere shortly before 1 p.m. and the astronauts landed safely into the Pacific Ocean. Before we continue, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to get notified whenever a new video is uploaded. Number 9. Aron Ralston. Aron Ralston was hiking alone in Blue John Canyon in eastern Wayne County, Utah on April 26, 2003 when a boulder loosened and caught his right forearm as he descended a small hole. Aron assumed he died because he hadn't notified anyone where he was. He continuously drank water for the next 5 days, eventually drinking his urine when his water supply ran out. He attempted to break the boulder multiple times but was unsuccessful. He realized he'd have to amputate his arm early on. After trying with tourniquets and superficial cuts to his arm, he realized he'd have to cut through the bone on the 4th day even though he lacked the necessary instruments. Aron had etched out his name, date of birth, and presumed death day on the canyon wall by the 6th day, as well as videotaped his goodbyes to his family. His arm began to deteriorate the next day due to a lack of circulation. But fortunately, Ralston had a light bulb moment. He could feel his bone bending and thought he could break it with the boulder. He was successful, and he proceeded to amputate his arm using his multi-tool in under an hour. Aron climbed out of the canyon slot, rappelling down a 60-foot cliff, and got out of the canyon delirious and dehydrated. He was discovered by a vacationing family of 3. They fed him and took him to the hospital's emergency room. What a lucky streak! Aron later speculated that he would have bled to death if he had removed his arm earlier. Later, he was reunited with his amputated arm after it was discovered and returned to him. It was burned and scattered at the scene of the accident. The film 127 Hours starring James Franco tells Aron Ralston's harrowing story. Number 8. Julianne Kopec. Julianne, then 17 years old, survived a 2-mile fall into the jungle on Christmas Eve 1971. Her flight, a passenger plane bound for Pucallpa, had only 1 survivor. Everything was going well until a bolt of lightning struck the plane. The plane went down and the Amazon rainforest nosedived and crashed. Fortunately for her, Kopec was secured to her seat during the freefall and woke up alone the next day. She was dressed in a tiny dress and 1 shoe. The other half of her sandals had been misplaced. She suffered a shattered collarbone, severe wounds, and a concussion. Julianne had learned a lot about survival in the rainforest from spending 2 years with her parents on the research station, and she put that information to good use. Julianne was short-sighted and she only had a small bag of candies, which was quickly depleted. All odds were against her. She only walked in the water since she knew it was safer. It was scorching during the day and extremely cold at night, and it frequently rained throughout the day. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw a boat near a gravel bank and a trail leading to safety on the 10th day of her struggle. She had a maggot-infested wound on her arm, which she treated by pouring gasoline on it. 3 men emerged from the woods the next day. She told them what had happened in Spanish, and they attended to her wounds, fed her, and transported her back to civilization. She later discovered her mother had survived the original crash but died a few days later. Her autobiography, I Fell from the Sky, was published and released on March 10, 2011 and won the Corine Literature Prize. Number 7. Joe Simpson and Simon Yates. Joe Simpson, 25, and his 21-year-old climbing partner Simon Yates accomplished the difficult feat of climbing the 6,344-meter mountain Ciula Grande in the Peruvian Andes in 1985. Simpson injured his leg on their way back down, causing them to fear he would die. Yates hung in the air for hours, dangling from a rope linked to him, attempting to lower his climbing buddy down the mountainside. The rope eventually broke, leaving Simpson powerless and unable to communicate with his climbing partner. Yates held up Simpson's entire weight, unsure if his friend was alive or dead. The rope continued to drag Yates, forcing him to decide to save his own life by cutting the rope and destroying the link that was holding Simpson up. This is it, Simpson thought, and he assumed he was finished. However, he somehow survived the fall and landed in a snowy cave. Simpson spent the next 4 days crawling back to camp with a fractured leg, no food, and in excruciating pain. He arrived a couple of hours before Yates was scheduled to depart. They both made it through the trauma. Simpson is now the author of Touching the Void, a 1988 book on his and Yates' near-fatal climb. Number 6. Harrison Okene. Harrison Okene was the chef in a crew of 12 on the Jaskin 4. He was the only survivor. When the boat capsized, he was in the bathroom. The Jaskin 4 was upside down in around 100 feet of water, with 11 crew members dead. Okene prayed to God for 60 hours while trapped in an air pocket with only 1 bottle of Coke and 2 flashlights he'd found. As the boat began to sink, he described his surroundings as dark and noisy. He was aware that the loud noises were aquatic life fighting over what he assumed were his crewmates' bodies. A team was dispatched almost 3 days later to rescue the men's bodies and remains. From afar, Okene heard a hammering sound. He dove into the frigid water in an attempt to get the diver's attention. He waved his hands in front of the camera and stroked the back of his head. The diver had announced to the world that he had discovered a survivor by shouting into the speaker. He was fitted with a diving helmet and a harness. They warmed him up with hot water and provided him with an oxygen mask. Before he could return to the surface, Okene had to spend 60 hours in a decompression chamber. Some Nigerians believed he used black magic to rescue himself. Okene has promised never to return to the sea and has accepted work as a chef on land, but he still has nightmares and suffers from survivor's guilt. Number 5. Ada Blackjack. Ada Blackjack embarked on a trip to Wrangler Island to provide for her ailing kid. Alan Crawford, Lorne Knight, Fred Maurer, and Milton Gale set out to seize Wrangel Island for the British Empire by Arctic explorer Vilhjalmur Stephenson. They were intended to be picked up after a year, but the Teddy Bear, the ship that was supposed to transport them, was forced to return owing to impassable ice. They realized their supplies weren't going to last them another year. By 1923, one of the men, Lorne Knight, grew ill, and the rest of the team decided to leave him in the care of Blackjack and set out to find help, only to never return. Ada cared for Knight for 6 months, taking on the demanding role of 4 men. She acted as a huntsman, gathering wood, hunting for food, and caring for him. All the while, Knight projected his anger onto her. On June 23rd, Knight died, leaving Blackjack alone on the island. Blackjack buried his body in his sleeping bag and erected a makeshift barricade of boxes to keep wild animals at bay. Blackjack also learned how to lay traps to attract white foxes, taught herself how to shoot birds, built a platform above her home to observe polar bears in the distance, and fashioned a skin boat out of driftwood. The ship Donaldson rescued her nearly 2 years after her arrival. After receiving heavy criticism for not caring for Knight more, she reconciled with her son and decided to live in poverty. Number 4. Hugh Glass. Hugh Glass was an American fur trapper and frontiersman. In 1823, Glass joined a fur trading expedition led by William Henry Ashley that started a year before. Glass, who had been hunting ahead of the group, had become separated from them, came across a grizzly bear and 2 cubs in late August. Despite being brutally mauled, he managed to survive the incident. He had a shattered leg, a ripped scalp, and a pierced throat, according to reports. After 2 days of being carried on a litter, he was handed over to 2 men, John Fitzgerald and Jim Bridger, who would be paid a bonus if they could properly bury him. Glass's only evidence of life was his eye movements and breathing. Fitzgerald and Bridger buried Glass in a shallow grave 5 days later since they were about to be discovered by the Indians. Gun, knife, tomahawk, and fire-making kit. Glass eventually summoned the courage to make it to Fort Kiowa, motivated by vengeance against the men who abandoned him. He made it by foraging what he could, even coming across wolves tearing into a buffalo calf and devouring the rest when they were finished. Glass returned to Fort Kiowa 200 to 300 miles later and allegedly sought revenge 2 months later. Some speculate that Fitzgerald enlisted in the army to avoid Glass's wrath. Glass went back to trapping. After a dispute with the Indians in 1833, Glass was assaulted and killed. You might recall Glass's narrative from Leonardo DiCaprio's 2015 film, The Revenant. Number 3. Loic Pilowos and Guillaume Neyral. Loic Pilowos and Guillaume Neyral got lost in French Guiana, a French overseas department bordering Brazil and Venezuela, during a 60-mile walk to Sal. They erected a shelter and stayed put for 3 weeks after realizing that they were lost, lighting fires in hopes of attracting attention. Helicopters were unable to see them due to the dense canopy of the forest. They hiked 3 hours a day for 3 weeks till Mr. Pilowos arrived in Sal. He'd previously heard a jet and assumed they were only a few days away. He arrived in the area on Thursday morning and advised them where to look for his companion. According to Martin Andre of the Cayenne Gendarmerie, Mr. Neyral was found on the ground absolutely out of breath, malnourished, and dehydrated. Gilles, his brother, described him as almost unrecognizable. Both men were parasite-infested with worms burrowing into their flesh. Mr. Neyral had problems speaking and moving after consuming venom from a poorly cooked spider. He was also bitten by an irritating tropical flea known as Pos diegotis. Mr. Neyral was admitted to the hospital and stayed there for many days to recover. Angelique Pilowos, Mr. Pilowos' wife, stated that she never thought she'd see her husband again. Number 2. Ernest Shackleton. The objective was to cross the hazardous Weddell Sea in August 1914 and settle at Vassal Bay. The crushing ice of the Weddell Sea was well known. 28 men, including Ernest Shackleton, boarded the Endurance. The ice had become too hazardous to travel through by January 1915, and the Endurance was trapped. Shackleton said that they would spend the winter on the ice. He ordered his men to set up camp using the ship's wreckage and to shoot the 4 weakest sled dog pups and the carpenter's cat, Mrs. Chippy, as the ship began to break. The sailors constructed a camp on the ice until the ship sank on November 21st. They agreed to stay for 3 months. The remaining dogs were devoured, and by April, the floe on which they were surviving began to break, forcing them to board 3 lifeboats. They arrived on Elephant Island a week later, the first land they had seen in 497 days. Shackleton then embarked on one of the lifeboats with 5 men and a month's worth of supplies, while the rest of the crew stayed behind and took refuge on the 2 remaining rafts. They finally made it to civilization on May 20th. The last of the guys were rescued and saved on August 30th, 1916. Number 1. The Robertson Family. The Robertson family, along with a hitchhiker named Robin Williams, set out for Falmouth in a 43-foot schooner called the Lisette in January 1971. The family sailed across the Atlantic for the next year and a half. They were attacked by a pod of killer whales 17 months into their journey. Their boat sank, forcing them to scramble onto an inflatable life raft designed for 10 people. Dougal Robertson had hoped to sail to the Pacific Center and ride the current back to America. They had enough water and provisions to last 6 days, including dried bread, biscuits, onions, and fruit. They collected rainwater in containers, hunted turtles and fish, and when water became scarce, they drank turtle blood. They also used turtle oil to keep warm and cure wounds on their skin. Lynn, the mother, and a nurse demanded that they drink the water through enemas with tubes, knowing that they would be harmful if consumed orally. The raft got unstable after 16 days, so they took turns sitting in the dry part of the boat. After 38 days in isolation, a Japanese trawler, the Tokumaru II, noticed their distress flares on July 23, 1972, and they made it back home. And that's it, we have made it to the end of this video. So what do you think? What other unbelievable human survival stories have you read or seen? Please let us know in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you drop a like and subscribe. Oh, and turn on post notifications. Now, if you'll excuse me, thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.